boy had always felt something shift inside him whenever he heard music, especially the sound of a piano. It was a feeling he couldn't really explain, something warm and alive that seemed to rise from the center of his chest and move all the way to his fingertips. He lived in a small, busy neighborhood where people were always rushing somewhere, but in the middle of all the noise stood a community center. And inside that center was a room filled with music that floated out through half-open windows almost every afternoon. He would stop there every single day on his way home. Some days he stood only for a minute, other days longer, but he always paused just enough to hear the piano. The notes sounded soft sometimes, loud at other times, but they always carried a story he wished he could be a part of. He didn't know much about music, and he had never touched a piano before, but somehow the sound felt familiar, as if he had known it all his life. One afternoon, after a long day at school, he found himself standing outside the same window once again. He leaned slightly closer, listening to a new tune he had never heard before. The tune rose and fell like a voice trying to tell him something secret. His heart beat a little faster. Without thinking, he closed his eyes and imagined his own hands moving over the keys, creating something beautiful. When he opened his eyes, he noticed the door of the center was wide open. People walked in and out carrying bags and instruments. A few were talking in the hallway, others were laughing. For a moment, he felt a quiet spark of courage. It surprised him because courage was not something he felt often. But today, something inside urged him to take a step forward. He looked down at his worn shoes, then at the door again. His palms felt sweaty, and his legs felt a bit shaky, but he took a deep breath and walked inside. The air smelled like dust mixed with old wood and something sweet, maybe tea from the little kitchen near the entrance. He had walked past that door 100 times, but this was the first time he entered. The hallway felt wider from inside. He could hear soft chatter from a room to the left. That was the room where the piano was. He stood near the doorway and peeked in. Several students sat inside, listening to their instructor speaking. The piano stood at the front of the room, shining under the afternoon light. Seeing it from up close made his heart beat faster. He didn't want to interrupt the class. He wasn't even sure if he was allowed to be there, but he couldn't stop staring at the piano. The keys looked smooth and clean, almost glowing. He imagined them under his fingers. He imagined pressing one key just to feel the vibration. He waited quietly near the door until the instructor finished speaking. When the students began practicing in pairs, he stepped a little closer. The instructor noticed him standing there, a small figure trying not to be noticed. "Do you need something?" the instructor asked. His voice caught in his throat for a moment, but he forced himself to speak. I only want to touch the piano. Just once. If I can." The room fell silent for a second. A few students turned to look at him. Some looked curious, others amused. The instructor blinked in surprise. "You want to touch it?" the instructor asked gently, as if unsure he heard correctly. He nodded quickly, his heart racing. "Yes, only one time." One of the students whispered something to another, and they both smiled in a way that made him look down at the floor. He felt heat creep up the back of his neck, but he kept standing there. He had already come too far to run away now. The instructor walked toward him and gave a small smile, though it looked more polite than welcoming. "This is a class, you see. The piano is for the students who take lessons here. Have you ever played before?" He shook his head. "No, but I listen every day from outside. I only want to feel the keys." The instructor sighed quietly. "I understand, but the instrument is delicate. We can't allow people to use it unless they are students. I'm sure you can come back another time, maybe when we have an open event." He nodded again, though this time the courage he had carried with him started to fade. He didn't leave, but he stepped back a little and stood near the corner of the hallway. The music continued, but now it felt distant, like something slipping out of reach. Still, he didn't want to go home yet. His feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the floor. He thought maybe, just maybe, they might change their mind if he stayed a little longer. Minutes passed. Students practiced their pieces, some playing softly, others making mistakes and laughing about it. Through the doorway, he watched the class, memorizing the way their fingers moved. Some lifted their wrists gently. Others pressed the keys with confidence. He noticed how every touch created a different sound. He imagined himself sitting there. He imagined placing his hands on the keys and letting the first sound escape. People walked around him, but no one paid attention anymore. He blended into the hallway like a shadow. But he didn't mind. He was used to being invisible. What mattered was the small hope still burning inside him. He replayed the sound he had heard earlier in his mind. He tried to hum the tune softly under his breath, making sure no one could hear him. Came naturally, which surprised even him. He hummed the rise and fall of the melody until he almost forgot where he was. Suddenly, the class grew louder. A student had broken a string on another instrument, and the instructor seemed frustrated. Voices filled the room. People walked in and out, carrying different items. For a moment, the piano stood alone, untouched. He watched it like someone watches a dream lying just out of reach. He took one small step closer, then another. His heart pounded hard, and his breath felt stuck in his chest. He wasn't trying to sneak in. He simply felt drawn to it, as if the piano itself was calling him. But before he could get too close, someone from the staff walked past and noticed him standing there again. The staff member gave him a curious look, not unkind, just puzzled. "You're still here?" the staff member asked. He nodded. "I was just listening." The staff member glanced inside the room, then back at him. "You really like the piano, don't you?" He nodded again, this time more firmly. "Yes, a lot." The staff member didn't say anything more, but they gave a small thoughtful nod and walked away. He felt a hint of hope returning. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. Slowly, he leaned on the wall again. He watched the class settle down. The instructor stepped out to take a phone call, leaving the students to practice quietly. The piano remained open, empty, waiting. The boy stood there silently, the same calm determination in his eyes that had brought him inside in the first place. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if anyone would ever allow him to sit at that piano. But he stayed because something inside told him not to give up. And deep inside, beneath the worry and fear and doubt, he felt a tiny spark that whispered that his moment, however small or brief, just might come sooner than he thought. The moment the boy stepped back into the hallway, he felt the weight of the instructor's refusal settling deep inside him. But even with that heavy feeling, he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something kept him rooted to the spot, something stronger than disappointment. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was simply the way the piano called to him, like a voice he had known forever. He leaned against the wall, trying to make himself smaller so he wouldn't disturb anyone. Students walked past him with their folders and music sheets. Some didn't notice him at all. Others gave him quick glances, the kind that last only a second but say a lot. A few whispered to their friends, and he wondered if they were talking about him, though he tried not to let the thought bother him too much. Inside the room, the class went on. The instructor had stepped back, trying to calm the students after the broken string caused a brief commotion. The atmosphere was different now, a little tense, a little louder. The boy kept watching everything with quiet eyes, his mind drifting between the sounds and his own thoughts. He knew he didn't belong in that room. He knew he wasn't a student like the others. He had no books, no polished shoes, no lessons paid for. But he also knew something else. He loved the piano more than anything he had ever known. And that love kept him there. As he stood there, he remembered the first time he had heard the piano from outside the center. It had been months ago. He was walking home from school, his backpack heavy with homework and his head filled with the usual worries of the day. But when that sound reached him, soft, warm, alive, everything else faded. He remembered stopping immediately, turning his head toward the window. He had listened for almost 10 minutes before someone inside closed the window, cutting off the sound like a door shutting on a dream. Since then, he stopped there every day, never knowing who played, never knowing what the songs were called. He just listened, letting the music carry him away. That moment had changed him quietly. And now, even though he had been turned away, he couldn't help but hope that there might still be a way. The instructor finally walked out of the room, rubbing his forehead as he took a call. Students continued practicing, though not as confidently as before. Some pairs tried to work through their assigned pieces, but the energy in the room had shifted. The boy shifted a little too, pushing himself off the wall. His legs felt stiff, but he moved closer to the doorway again. He didn't step inside. He would never do that without permission. But he stood close enough to see the piano clearly, close enough to hear every note. One student was trying to play a simple song but kept pressing the keys too hard. Another kept mixing up the left and right hand. A few students sighed loudly, frustrated with their own mistakes. The boy watched it all carefully, trying to understand why their hands moved that way. He studied the shape of their fingers, the way they pressed the keys with different strengths. He imagined himself sitting there. He imagined touching the keys gently, the way he had seen the instructor do it earlier. But every time he imagined it, he felt a pang in his chest. He wondered if that moment would ever come. A few minutes later, the instructor returned, still talking on the phone. He signaled for the students to continue practicing and left the room again. The piano sat untouched, waiting for the next student to take their turn. The boy swallowed hard. He couldn't take his eyes off it. The glossy surface reflected the light from the window, making the keys look almost inviting. He had never wanted something so badly before. Not toys, not games, not anything. Just this one chance to touch the piano. A staff member approached him again, the same one who had spoken to him earlier. They looked at him with a kinder expression this time. "You're still here," they said softly. The boy nodded. "I'm listening." The staff member looked into the room, then back at him. They didn't smile, but their eyes softened just a little. "You like music a lot, don't you?" He nodded once more, his voice quiet. "Yes, I listen every day." The staff member thought for a moment. "Do you want to learn how to play someday?" He paused, not because he doubted the answer, but because saying it out loud felt like admitting a dream he wasn't supposed to have. After a moment, he nodded. More than anything. The staff member didn't say anything else. They just patted him gently on the shoulder and walked away. It wasn't a promise, but it felt like someone had finally seen him. Not just the boy waiting in the hallway, but the boy with a wish. Inside the room, a new student stepped up to the piano. They pressed the keys with confidence, filling the air with a fast, cheerful melody. The boy closed his eyes and let the sound wrap around him. He pictured every movement of the player's hands. When he opened his eyes again, the tune ended, and the student stood up. For a few seconds, no one replaced them at the piano. It stood empty once again. The boy's heart fluttered nervously. His body moved a little closer without him even realizing it. He didn't step inside, but he hovered near the doorway, his breath catching in his throat. A few of the students noticed him standing there again. One of them whispered, "He's still here." The words weren't unkind, but they weren't encouraging either. Another student glanced his way and frowned slightly, as if wondering why he refused to leave. But he stayed where he was. The instructor returned after ending his call and immediately clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, let's go over the group section again," he said. All the students gathered around him. The piano was ignored for the moment. The instructor explained the next part of the lesson, pointing to the music sheet. The students nodded, though some looked confused. The boy stood quietly, his eyes drifting back to the piano again and again. He knew he shouldn't hope too much. He knew chances like this didn't happen often. But his heart didn't listen to reason. It kept whispering something soft and stubborn. Maybe, maybe, maybe. Another 10 minutes passed. Students practiced, the instructor corrected mistakes, and the room filled with a mix of sounds. Notes played slightly off-key, laughter, frustrated sighs. The boy listened to all of it, absorbing every detail like it was part of a story he desperately wanted to enter. Finally, the instructor sighed and told everyone to take a short break. Students stood up, stretching their arms, chatting with each other. Some walked out to get water. Others gathered around their friends. The instructor left the room again, probably to handle something else. The piano once more was left completely alone. The boy looked at it, his heart loud in his ears. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just watched. Then something unexpected happened. A different staff member, not the one who had spoken to him earlier, walked by and paused when they saw him still standing there. They glanced inside the quiet room, then back at him. "You're really dedicated," the staff member said with a small, surprised laugh. The boy didn't know what to say. He simply whispered, "I just want to try it." One time, the staff member raised an eyebrow. "You've never touched a piano before?" He shook his head. The staff member stood there for a long moment, thinking. Then they glanced again at the empty piano. "Well," they said slowly, "the room is empty right now." The boy's breath caught. The staff member looked around the hallway, making sure no one was watching. "Just 1 minute," they said quietly. "Only one. Sit down and touch it gently. But only while the room is empty." The boy felt his heart leap with so much force he thought it might burst. "Thank you," he whispered, the words trembling. The staff member nodded once, stepped aside, and gestured toward the room. For the first time in his life, the boy took a step inside the room. Not as someone listening from afar, not as someone waiting in the hallway, but as someone who finally had a chance. He walked toward the piano slowly, as if approaching something sacred. His moment had finally begun. The boy stepped into the quiet room as if he were stepping into another world. His footsteps felt too loud even though he moved softly. The air carried the faint smell of old books and polished wood, and the sunlight stretched across the floor in warm lines. The students were gone, the instructor was somewhere outside, and for the first time the piano stood before him with no one sitting at it. He paused just a few steps away, unsure if he should breathe or hold his breath. His heart beat so fast that he thought someone outside might hear it. The staff member who had allowed him inside leaned against the doorway, keeping watch, making sure no one else walked in unexpectedly. "It's all right," the staff member whispered. "Go ahead. Just be gentle." The boy nodded but didn't take another step yet. He simply stared at the piano. Up close, it looked different. More real, more powerful, more alive. The keys weren't just black and white anymore. They held 1,000 sounds inside them, waiting for someone to release them. Slowly, he reached out his hand, not to touch the keys, but to touch the wooden frame. His fingertips rested on the smooth surface, and he felt a tiny shiver run through him. It felt almost like the piano was breathing. He pulled his hand back for a moment, overwhelmed by the idea that he was actually standing this close. The staff member watched him quietly, understanding that this moment mattered to him more than words could explain. The boy finally moved to the bench and sat down. His legs felt too short for the seat, but he didn't care. He placed his hands on his lap and looked down at the keys, letting the beautiful silence wrap around him. This was it. He took in a deep breath, then slowly lifted one hand. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. He didn't press anything yet. He wanted to feel ready, not rushed, not nervous, just ready. The staff member whispered, "Go on." So he lowered his finger onto one key. A single soft note floated into the air. His breath caught. The sound was simple, small, but to him it felt like a door opening. He pressed the key again, then tried another. A second note followed the first, then a third, each one making his heart rise a little higher. The room remained still, except for the gentle echo of the piano. He tried a few more keys, experimenting with the sounds. Some were lower and heavy, others higher and light. It felt like he was learning a new language, one he somehow already understood. But then something deeper stirred inside him, something familiar. He closed his eyes. That tune he had hummed for months, the one he heard and memorized from outside the window, drifted back into his mind. He had never played it before, not on a piano, not on any instrument. He had only carried it inside him, holding it like a secret. His fingers began to move. At first, they moved shyly, as if afraid to make a mistake. But soon the notes began forming the melody that lived in his heart. The tune rose slowly, steady and warm. It filled the room like a gentle breeze. The staff member in the doorway straightened, surprised. The boy didn't notice. He was lost in the music now. His fingers picked up confidence. He pressed the keys with more feeling, shaping the melody into something soft but full of life. Every note flowed into the next as if it had been waiting to be played. The sound reached into the hallway. The students outside stopped talking. One of them whispered, "Who's playing?" Another said, "Is that the instructor?" "No," someone else replied. "He's not in there." The instructor, who was walking down the hallway with a clipboard in hand, froze when the music reached his ears. The tune didn't sound like any of his students' pieces. It didn't even sound like a beginner's attempt. It sounded natural, emotional, alive. The instructor slowly followed the sound. Inside the room, the boy kept playing. His face looked calm, but his hands moved with a quiet intensity, as if they had been waiting for this moment forever. The light from the window shone across the keys, and the notes mixed with the golden air. Students gathered near the doorway, watching with wide eyes. They didn't say anything. They didn't laugh or whisper this time. They just listened. The boy didn't notice them. He was somewhere far away, lost in a place built from sound and memory. Each note gave him courage. Each sound felt like it belonged to him. He didn't know how long he played. Time didn't feel real in that moment. All he knew was that the music inside him was finally being heard. When the melody reached its soft ending, his fingers slowly came to a stop. The last note lingered in the air, hanging like a small star that refused to fade. He kept his eyes closed a second longer, letting the silence settle around him. Then he opened them, and he froze. The doorway was full of people, students, the staff member, and the instructor standing in the center. All of them were staring at him, their faces filled with surprise. His heart sank instantly. He stood up quickly, panic rising in his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping away from the bench. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." He backed up until his legs bumped into the chair behind him. The room felt suddenly big and full of eyes, and he felt small again. The staff member who had let him in raised a hand gently. "It's all right," they said, but the boy couldn't calm down. He lowered his head and stared at the floor, waiting for someone to scold him, waiting to be told to leave. He wished he could disappear. But then the instructor walked toward him. The boy tensed. The instructor stopped just a step away, looking at him with an expression the boy had never seen on his face before. Not annoyance, not frustration, something else. The instructor asked softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy swallowed, unable to speak. After a moment, he whispered, "I didn't learn. I just listened from outside." The instructor blinked, stunned. The students behind him exchanged amazed glances. "You mean," the instructor said slowly, "you've never had a lesson?" The boy shook his head, still staring at the floor. The instructor let out a soft breath. "That tune, did you make it yourself?" The boy nodded, feeling his cheeks warm. "I hum it sometimes. It's just something I hear in my head." The instructor looked at him with a new kind of respect, quiet, genuine, and full of wonder. The room fell silent again, this time not from shock, but from awe. No one saw him as the boy in the hallway anymore. No one saw him as the one who didn't belong. For the first time, everyone saw him for who he truly was. Someone with music already living inside him. The instructor spoke softly, almost like he didn't want to break the moment. "You have a gift." The boy raised his eyes a little, unsure if he had heard correctly. "A real gift," the instructor repeated. The boy didn't know what to say. He had never heard anything like that before. He didn't even know how to accept it. But he didn't need to speak. Everyone in the room already understood. Something had changed, and nothing would be the same after this. The rain had slowed down by the time the evening lights turned on across the small town, but the streets still shimmered with leftover drops that clung to everything like tiny stars. Inside the old community hall, the air carried a quiet, almost nervous energy. People were moving around with small tasks, placing chairs, checking microphones, fixing curtains, but none of them could stop glancing toward the side of the stage where the piano stood waiting. It was polished earlier that day, and its surface now reflected the soft light like a mirror. But the piano wasn't the reason everyone felt so unsettled. It was the boy sitting near it. He sat with his hands resting gently on his lap, as if even letting them hang loose would disturb someone. His eyes followed every movement in the hall, watching people rush by without really seeing him. He didn't blame them. They were busy. They had their own thoughts and their own worries. Still, he couldn't help but feel like he was only allowed to exist on the edge of their world. He had been given permission to play, finally, but even now he wasn't sure it would last. Someone could change their mind. Someone could say it wouldn't be right. Someone could decide a boy like him didn't belong behind that piano. Not on the night when so many people were coming to listen. The organizer approached him with quick steps and a smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. She told him the schedule, the basic instructions where he was supposed to wait. He nodded politely and thanked her. Even though he didn't really need any of the information. He had memorized everything the moment they first showed him the list. He liked to understand every rule because breaking even one by accident was something he feared more than anything. After the organizer left, the hall grew quieter, though people were still around. The boy leaned back slightly in his chair and let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He told himself he didn't need to worry, that this evening was a gift, that he should be grateful. But doubt kept whispering that maybe he didn't deserve this chance. Maybe he had pushed too hard by asking, by pleading, by hoping. A soft sound caught his attention, the piano bench sliding a little as someone adjusted it. It was the older man who usually took care of the instruments. He wasn't tall or loud, but he had a way of moving that made everything around him feel calmer. The boy had only spoken to him once, back when he first came to the hall asking if he could try touching the piano. The man had been kind then, even though he'd said no. But he had said it gently. Now the man turned toward the boy and gave a small nod, almost like a reassurance. The boy sat up straighter. It helped, even if only a little. As time passed, people began taking their seats in the hall. Conversations filled the air. Chairs shifted. Programs rustled in hands. The boy could hear everything. Every sound. Every whisper. He wondered if anyone out there knew he would be part of the show. He doubted it. His name wasn't printed anywhere. He wasn't officially on the list. He had been added quietly, almost like a last-minute favor. The organizers worried that if they put his name on the program, people might question it. They said the audience might not understand. He didn't want to cause trouble. He only wanted to play. When the first performer walked onto the stage, a round of applause filled the hall. The boy watched from the side, staying small, staying unnoticed. The performer played a lively tune, something cheerful and fast. The audience loved it. That made the boy happy too. He liked when music made people feel something good. But it also tightened the knot in his chest. He wasn't used to being looked at. He wasn't used to being heard by a crowd. What if they didn't like what he played? What if they thought he was strange? Another performer came on. Then another. Each one brought something different, songs, short stories, even a small dance performance. The atmosphere grew more and more lively, and with it, the boy's nerves tangled themselves into a tight, stubborn knot. Finally, the organizer approached him again. She leaned in close so others wouldn't hear and whispered that his turn would be after the next piece. She also reminded him that he didn't need to stay long on stage. Just a few minutes. Just one song. She said it like she was offering him reassurance, but it sounded more like a warning. Or maybe that was just how he interpreted it. He nodded again. He didn't trust himself to speak. The performer before him finished with a bright bow and cheerful wave. People clapped loudly. The boy wiped his palms on his trousers and stood. His legs felt stiff, like they weren't fully listening to him. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself, but the air felt thin. The organizer stepped on stage and announced a special short performance. She didn't say his name. She didn't explain who he was. She only said that someone would be sharing a small piece on the piano. A few people in the audience murmured. Some leaned forward. Some leaned back. It was impossible to tell what anyone was thinking. The boy walked toward the piano. The lights on the stage were warm but bright, and they made everything in front of him look blurry at the edges. He reached the bench and sat carefully. He placed his hands on his lap again, just for a moment, grounding himself. Then he lifted them. Usually, when he touched a piano, he liked to run his fingers over the keys first. Not playing anything, just feeling the smoothness, the shape, the coolness beneath his skin. It helped him understand the instrument, helped him feel its mood. But tonight, with dozens of eyes watching him, he didn't feel brave enough to linger. He placed his fingers on the keys. For a second, everything disappeared. The crowd, the lights, the pressure, the uncertainty. There was only the memory of the tune he had shaped countless times alone. The one he had played quietly in empty rooms where no one else listened. It wasn't a famous song. It wasn't something he learned from a teacher. It was something that had formed on its own, like the way clouds drift into patterns without anyone shaping them. He pressed the first key. The sound rang out softly, not loud or bold, but warm. It was the kind of sound that felt like a hand resting gently on your shoulder. He continued, letting the notes move in a slow, steady rhythm. His fingers eased into the pattern they knew so well, and the hall began to change. People who had been whispering grew still. People who had been shifting in their seats stopped moving. The boy didn't notice them. He only felt the music. He only felt the meaning of each note as it bloomed and faded. He wasn't thinking about whether he looked strange or whether he was doing something wrong. He wasn't thinking about rules or judgments. For the first time that evening, he felt like he belonged exactly where he was. The melody climbed gently, then settled into a soft, aching phrase that came from a part of him he didn't have words for. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was more like the feeling of standing in the rain but not minding it. Like knowing something hurt but also knowing it helped you grow. People leaned forward without realizing it. Some held their breath. A few felt a warmth in their chest that they didn't have a name for. When the piece finally reached its final note, a quiet, fading tone that hovered in the air before slipping away, the boy lifted his hands slowly. He heard nothing for a moment. Scared him. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe he had disappointed them. Then the applause began. It was small at first, like someone wasn't sure if they should start. Then it grew, and grew, and grew until the hall was filled with a sound he had never imagined would be for him. The boy blinked, unsure how to react. He wasn't used to clapping meant for him. He wasn't used to any of this. The older man from earlier was standing near the side of the stage, clapping too. His eyes weren't loud, but they were warm. The boy felt something shift inside him, like a door opening just a little. He stood from the bench, gave the smallest bow he could manage, and stepped off the stage. As he walked backstage, the applause still echoed in his ears, wrapping around him like a gentle promise he didn't yet understand. But something had changed. Something big. And deep down, he knew his story wasn't finished yet. The room was completely still for a moment after the last note faded. It was as if everyone inside needed a second to let what they had just witnessed settle in their minds. The boy sat frozen on the piano bench, his hands still hovering over the keys, not sure if he had done something wrong or something right. His heart was beating fast, and he wasn't sure if he should look around or keep his eyes lowered. He didn't want to break whatever moment had formed around him. When he finally took a small breath and turned his head, he noticed the instructor standing by the doorway, staring at him as if he had seen something unbelievable. The instructor's face wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't annoyed or confused either. It was a mix of surprise and something the boy couldn't fully understand. The few students who had come back stood quietly behind the instructor, watching him as if they were witnessing something rare. For the first time that day, the boy didn't feel like someone who didn't belong. He felt like someone who had finally been noticed. The instructor stepped forward slowly, his shoes making soft sounds on the floor. The boy sat up straight, unsure of what to expect. He worried they might still take the chance away from him. He worried they might think he had touched something he wasn't supposed to. But instead of scolding him, the instructor asked in a gentle voice, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy blinked in confusion for a moment. Then he shook his head lightly and said, "I didn't learn anywhere. I just listened from the window. I tried to follow the sounds in my head." His voice was soft, almost like he was afraid of being judged. He kept his hands in his lap to stop them from shaking. The instructor stared at him as if trying to understand how that was possible. He had been teaching students for years, but never had he seen someone walk in without any training and play something that felt so complete, so emotional, so natural. There was no doubt in his mind that this boy had something rare. Not something taught, not something practiced, but something that came from deep inside. One of the students whispered something, but the instructor raised a hand for silence. He didn't want this moment to be spoiled by doubt or quick judgments. He took a deep breath and said to the boy, "Would you like to learn properly? Would you like to come here and take lessons?" The boy's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out at first. He looked down at his worn shoes, then back at the piano, then at the instructor. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. All day he had felt like an outsider. All day he thought he would be turned away again. But now, he was being offered the very thing he had dreamed about silently for so long. "But, I can't pay," he whispered. "I don't have anything to give." The instructor smiled. A warm, understanding smile that showed he already knew the boy's situation. "You don't need to," he said. "You just need to show up. That is enough. The rest we will figure out." The boy felt something inside him loosen, like the tight knot of fear and doubt that had been sitting in his chest all day finally began to fall apart. He felt the corners of his eyes sting with tears he didn't want to show. He nodded quickly, as if afraid the offer would disappear if he took too long to accept. The students around him softened too. They looked at him differently now. Not like someone who didn't know anything, not like someone who didn't belong, but like someone worth watching. Someone who might even inspire them someday. Some of them stepped closer, wanting to see him play again. Others simply smiled quietly, as if they too were moved by what they had heard. The instructor asked him to try playing the same melody again, this time with everyone listening fully. The boy wiped his eyes secretly with the back of his hand and placed his fingers on the keys once more. He started slowly, letting the notes rise from the piano like soft breaths. The room fell into a gentle silence as everyone listened. His melody wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. Every note carried a piece of his story, his longing, his waiting, his hope, and somehow the music held onto the softness of the boy himself. When he finished for the second time, the instructor clapped first. Not loudly, not dramatically, but sincerely. The rest followed. The boy didn't know where to look or how to react, but he felt something new in that moment. He felt accepted. The instructor placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "You have something special. Don't ever doubt that." And for once, the boy believed it, even if just a little. From that day on, the community center became like a second home for him. He arrived early, sometimes before anyone else, and practiced with gentle focus. He listened to every lesson carefully, absorbing everything he could. He didn't rush, he didn't show off. He simply learned with an open heart, grateful for every chance he was given. The people who had once ignored him now greeted him warmly. The students who had doubted him now helped him, supported him, and sometimes even asked him for tips. The staff loved seeing him around, always ready to help, always respectful and full of quiet determination. Weeks turned into months, and the boy's talent grew. What had once been raw and unpolished became more refined each day. His hands moved smoothly, telling stories through sound. His passion didn't fade. It only grew stronger with every lesson, every practice session, every melody. News began to spread within the community. People came by just to listen to him practice in the afternoons. Some brought others to hear him play, saying, "You have to listen to this boy. He came from nothing, and now he plays like someone born for this." One evening during a small community event, the instructor invited him to perform. The boy hesitated at first, nervous about being in front of so many people. But he remembered the window he used to stand outside. He remembered the days he wished for a chance he thought he would never get. Now that the chance was finally here, he knew he couldn't let fear hold him back. He sat at the piano in front of the quiet crowd. The room was full, but it felt peaceful. When he started playing, his hands didn't shake this time. His melody filled the air gently, like a soft story told without words. People listened with full hearts, moved by the honesty in his playing. When he finished, The applause was warm and long. Some people stood to clap. The boy felt overwhelmed but happy. He felt the same softness in his chest that he felt the first time he touched the piano, but now it was stronger. Felt like belonging. That night, the instructor told him, "You didn't just play well, you touched people. That is something not everyone can do." The boy didn't know how to respond, so he simply bowed his head slightly, feeling grateful for everything that had happened. The boy's journey continued, full of new steps and quiet achievements. But he never forgot the day he had first walked into the community center with nothing but a small dream inside him. He never forgot the fear he felt, the refusal he faced, and the moment his music finally changed everything. He learned that sometimes the world says no before it says yes. Sometimes people judge before they understand. But he also learned that patience, courage, and a kind heart can open doors he once thought were locked forever. And years later, when people talked about him, they didn't mention the day he was refused. They talked about the day his fingers created pure wonder, the moment he touched the piano for the very first time.